Article 5, is it reliable? Can we rely on it? What is NATO's purpose at the moment if we can't rely on it?
Well, Article 5 has been there since 1949. It held the Soviet Union at bay during the Cold War. There wasn't an absolute guarantee. It's still a decision to be taken by each country when they, as to what they do in response to a threat. But I think it has been very important. It has been a question now because of President Trump is taking a more sort of transactional approach to this. Will he, won't he? He likes to keep the world guessing. We'll see what he says later today. But I think one of the reasons we're seeing this sharp increase in European defence spending is partly because Donald Trump is urging them to do so. It's partly because they don't really have confidence in America, and when Europe realises it's going to have to defend itself against a resurgent and aggressive President Putin.
Is Europe capable of defending itself?
Well, at the moment, frankly, on its own, against a full-blooded Russian attack, no.
What would it take?
Well,
is 5% enough? Are we spending in the right places?
At the moment, the Russians are completely bogged down in Ukraine. There's not going to be a Russian army capable of crossing the border into NATO. What we're seeing is a more hybrid sort of threat. You're seeing propaganda, you're seeing funding of political parties, which has been going on for decades in many ways, in order to undermine Western democracy. So there's a Russian threat to our system, to our way of life. Now, if there's a hard defence threat, Russian troops coming across the border into Estonia or into Poland, then that is a different sort of matter, and that's where you get the need for a common NATO response. Of course, NATO's Article 5 isn't just about America coming to Europe's aid. Article 5 is about all Europeans coming to each other's aid. It's a collective defence guarantee. Now, whether the Americans are there on the front line or not, we'll wait and see. But I think Europeans are improving their capability. But the fact is, NATO has been a broad alliance, and we've all depended upon one another. If the United States says it's no longer dependable, then Europe's going to have to do a lot more, and it will take a number of years in order to build up those capabilities.
Talk to us a little bit about the enforcement mechanism there. In the doomsday scenario where Donald Trump says, you know what, we're not going to honor Article 5 if the Baltics or if the Scandinavia part of the world kind of comes into focus, is there an enforcement mechanism?
Of course there's not. There's no way that Europeans can force America into the battlefield. It's a political a commitment, it's a treaty commitment, it's a convention, all these things which every US president since 1949 has upheld and maintained and supported, even if they might have had a few private doubts as to whether they really would go to war for an attack on Europe. But it was sufficiently credible to deter the Soviet Union and, until recently, their successors, Yeltsin and Putin, from doing anything aggressive in Europe. So there's nothing guaranteed in here, but it's a political assurance. It's not just to Europe, it's to Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, Australia and so on. Other countries which also depend upon US as being the backstop of their own defence. That doesn't mean the US is in the front line. Look at what's happening in the South China Sea at the moment, with the Chinese pushing out against the Filipinos. It's the Philippines which has to defend itself, but everybody knows, or has known up until now, that there's American hard stop behind Philippines' defence, and that's what's been the case in Europe as well. I hope very much that we get an agreed communique from the NATO summit, and that Donald Trump's administration reiterates what all previous US administrations have done for the last 70 years.
I want to go right back to the question that the guy was talking about in terms of spending here. We just talked to the economy minister of Spain. They're pulling back on some of that by a good chunk, 2.1% relative to 5%. Do they have a point? Does Spain have a point that in this environment of security questions, of building debt for every single European economy except for Germany, do they have a point that maybe they can get away with 2%? What kind of precedent does that set? Well,
2% used to be the target. That was set about 12 years ago. Yeah. That was the target for defence spending. Spain has always been a laggard on that. It has not had serious a threat to its territory from Russia or other aggressors. Its main problem is a security problem from North Africa with migrants coming across their border. I'm not defending Spain. I wish Spain had got to 2% many years ago, and that they should be doing more now because there's a collective threat to Europe. So Spain has to defend itself. I'm not going to defend them. But what we're seeing is this 5% has come out of discussions, it is a bit of a hybrid figure. It's not just about defence spending, it's about general security spending. Here in the UK, it will include border patrols, border controls as well, and your broad defence against cyber and so on, which usually comes under the intelligence budget.
Yeah.
So it's adding a number of things together to make 5%. The hard defence commitment is 3.5%.
Yeah.
And if the Spaniards are saying they can only do 2.1%, well, that's not good enough. They're going to have to do better than that.
But do others follow? If Spain can do it, if Spain gets the exemption, does Italy follow? Does France follow? Does Belgium follow? Do the others follow?
Well, France is not following. I don't know exactly what Italy's position is. These are targets to be met over the coming decade. Keir Starmer in the UK has said we will aim to achieve this by 2035. That's a long way away. But the main point, Kriti, is that this is on an upward trajectory. All European countries are investing a lot more in defence, and we're seeing a country like Germany, which has been another laggard like Spain and Italy in the European defence spending, making a really serious effort to get armed forces which are state of the art and with good technology and able to play their full part in a NATO defence operation.
How much do we know about the Iranian nuclear stockpile at the moment?
Well, right now, very little. I mean, I doubt.
Does that mean we just go back to where? What have we achieved?
Well, I think what's been achieved is that the Israeli strikes have taken out a lot of the key personnel. They've damaged a lot of Iran's defence capability. On the nuclear side, it will take quite some time, I think, to assess how much has been damaged. Obviously, the Iranians had notice after the Israeli strikes started. They then knew there was a possibility of American strikes, so they would have taken out the most sensitive material, including the 60% enriched uranium, out of those deep bunkers and hidden them somewhere. Now, I think President Trump was right to take the decision he did. It was also right to hold the Israelis back from pursuing regime change in Iran. If you have regime change, you have total chaos. You've got no one to hold to account. You don't know what's going to happen next. There's still an Iranian government in place. They're going to have to consolidate their control again. But it's going to be really important that the Trump administration, the Europeans, re-engage with the Iranian leadership in order to get a political agreement, because you don't want to have to keep on going back in and doing these strikes over and over again.
Where does Israel fall into all of this?
Where does
Israel fall into all of this in terms of the next steps, in terms of surveillance, in terms of making sure that the nuclear program isn't accelerated now in the face of these strikes? How crucial is Israel to Donald Trump's goal?
Well, I think Israel is crucial to Israel's goal, which is the long-term defence of Israel. Now, I think all of us were impressed and surprised, and the Iranians will have been shocked at the scale of Israeli penetration of their security system, how much coverage they've had, not just recently. When I was Chief of MI6, understanding what the Iranians were doing on the nuclear side was a really high priority for intelligence collection, and we worked closely with the Israelis at that time. But the Israelis have gone to another level in the last few years in terms of gathering actionable intelligence to attack individuals in the nuclear program and to have a fuller understanding of not just their enrichment activities, but their weaponization as well. And I think the Mossad will be very acutely focused on how the Iranians are going to behave over the coming weeks and months and what they're going to do to reconstitute that program. It's not going to go away. You can't destroy the know-how. We almost certainly haven't destroyed the partially enriched uranium that they've already got. But you are this problem is not going to go away. But there's no doubt that Iran is weaker now than it was before. There'll be some in the Iranian system who will say, yes, we've got to go for it. We've got to go for this nuclear weapon. But there'll be others, wiser heads, I hope, who will say, look, this is a turkey shoot. You know, we've been exposed as having poor security. We need to rethink our entire security strategy and forget about Hezbollah and Hamas and these other groups and focus on having security at home, but more normal relationships abroad. Now, we were close to that 20-odd years ago when Khatami and Rouhani and Zarif and so on were the dominant figures in Iranian politics. We've gone through a great big loop, and now maybe we'll get back to that again.